So we talked about how two like distinct Russias have developed after Peter tried to westernize everyone, and now I'll talk about the two groups that sort of formed out of this. We have the Slava Files and the Westernizers. So the Slava Files, the first thing to remember with the Slava Files is that Dostoevsky is a Slava File, and they're the people who reject the westernization, right? They want Russia to keep her heritage. So they talk about the past of Russia. They write these little stories about peasants and how great peasant life was. And the thing to understand about these guys is that they're not peasants. They're aristocrats. They went to Europe. They got European educations, and they decided like this is not what we want for Russia. So they rejected the idea that Russia should be like Western Europe. And so they reject reason and rationalism. They instead favor the Russian character, right? So this is the Slavophiles are another thing to remember about them is that they're very religious. They're typically really orthodox. They hate Western individualism, and they also think that faith has its place in philosophy, and it's important, right? So faith and reason can work together. If you remember Thomas Aquinas, it's kind of like that idea, right? So, the reason that, and we kind of go back to Rousseau here too, because remember Rousseau says, hey, the further along we get, the more sick we get. Dostoevsky and the Slavophiles think the same thing. Our society is broken, and we're really sick, and the thing that will fix that is religious faith, right? That's gonna heal us, and so we won't be alienated or nihilistic anymore because all we need is like a good healthy dose of Jesus in our lives. So these are the Slavophiles. And on the other hand, you have the Westernizers, the people who think like, yeah, Peter the Great was onto something. We should make Russia like the rest of Western Europe. So they are the ones who encourage the continual cultural association with the West. They're people who buy into these utopian myths like socialism and feminism, and they really want Russia to get rid of the serfs. Not get rid of them, but get rid of the feudal system and totally enter modernity and become an equal partner to the rest of Western Europe. The important thing to understand is that these people are the majority, right? Most people are Westernizers. Dostoevsky himself is a Westernizer until he has this sort of near-death experience. So, so Notes from Underground is actually a response to a book that is written by a Westernizer named Nikolai Chernyshevsky. He writes this book called What Is to Be Done, and Chernyshevsky gives us this model for what Russia can be, right? He's utilitarian, he's a feminist, he's a radical socialist who really believes in the powers of reason and science and education and social reform. And he thinks like, hey, look, what Russia needs is to have a revolution, right? To overcome her troubled past, get rid of the social hierarchy, get rid of feudalism, and the only way it's going to do that is through this revolution. So, Chernyshevsky writes a book called What Is to Be Done, and it's really complicated. I will tell you that one important part of the book are these dreams that this character Vera has, and one of the dreams she has is about this beautiful crystal palace. So she dreams that in the future everyone is living in this wonderful palace of crystal, and that's a metaphor. That's a metaphor for a society that's based totally on reason. There actually was a crystal palace. They built one for the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. It was meant to be this kind of showcase of British industrial technology. So Chernyshevsky is thinking about this crystal palace that was built and thinks like, this is what the future can be like. Everyone will act rationally and, will act according to their own interests. And Dostoevsky thinks this is ludicrous, right? So he takes the idea of a crystal palace and just laughs at it. So you can see this in Notes from Underground whenever the character, the protagonist talks about this crystal edifice or this palace of crystal. So Chernyshevsky believes that this could be like this perfect. It's a metaphor for a perfect, rational future, and the underground man sees this as this future that nobody wants. So if you, for example, look on page 35, he says, "You believe in a crystal edifice, forever indestructible, something that you can't even stick your tongue out at. It's so perfect." And he says, "I'm afraid of this edifice because it is crystal and it is indestructible, and you can't stick your tongue out at it, right? It's perfect." So anytime you see him making fun of the Crystal Palace, that's sort of what's going on here. So I'll tell you a little bit about Dostoevsky's life, and then we'll get into the specifics of the text. Like I mentioned before, Dostoevsky was a Westernizer in a past life. When he was really young, he was involved in this group of people, these radical intellectuals who called themselves the Petrushevsky Circle, and it was just like a book club. These people got together to discuss these really cool Western philosophy texts. Well, the thing to understand about these texts is that they've actually been banned at this point because the Tsar at the time, who's Nicholas I, is almost assassinated through this thing that happened called the Decemberist Uprising. And this was in 1825, and so he got really paranoid after that, and he banned all these texts. He's like, if this is what people are reading and it's encouraging them to be revolutionaries, we're going to get rid of all this stuff. And so Dostoevsky and his friends are reading all these cool banned books and stuff, and they get arrested in 1849. By some henchmen of Nicholas I, and they get sentenced to death for reading these banned texts. So, thank your lucky stars that you can read whatever books you want to read. So, Dostoevsky is sentenced to death for reading some books, and what happens to him basically is that they're walking him to the gallows, and they tell him at the last minute, like, JK, we're not gonna kill you. Can you imagine how stressful that could have been? Like, you think you're walking to your death, and it turns out they're kidding. But they don't just let him go. They send him to Siberia to work in a labor camp for 4 years. And this is not pleasant. I think probably Dostoevsky wishes he would have died, because this is really hard, intensive labor and stuff. And while he's in Siberia, he converts back to Christianity, and he's like, you know what, these ideas got me in so much trouble. And so he becomes like this total reactionary, right? It's like someone who is like a liberal when they're young, and they become totally conservative when they're older. This is exactly what happens to Dostoevsky. So I'll stop this one here, and then we'll talk more about some of the themes that you're going to run into in Notes from Underground.